As you heard earlier from Stephanie Sanford, the CLIMB conference is devoted to really three themes: research, policy, and practice, and how higher education can foster economic mobility for low-income students. This panel is about practice. How can campuses and how can systems most effectively do the three things that are really the key elements of mobility: enrolling a critical mass of low-income students, helping them make it to graduation, and making sure that they succeed in the job market. So the big question on the table for this panel is deceptively simple sounding and ever popular: what works? Now, being very rigorous economists, Raj and John and their colleagues are very careful not to say more than what they can prove in their research. And so far, they have not identified any causal effects of what high mobility colleges are doing to create good outcomes for students. But if you go back to their original paper, they're very clear that these institutions deserve further study as potential engines of economic mobility. And that's the motivation behind the research and the data collaboration that's being formally launched today that many of you are participating in. And it's also good reason to hear directly from some of the leaders who are dedicating themselves in a very practical way to figuring out what colleges can and should be doing to help students who are very much in need of this kind of mobility. Our panelists could not be better suited to the task, whether it's expertise in pathways programs, intrusive advising, technology nudges, or a host of other issues. We have three prominent college leaders who are pioneers in the movement to improve access and success for low-income students, and a foundation leader who spends a lot of time working with campuses on how best to serve first-generation low-income undergraduates. You have their bios, so I'll be brief. Michael Crow, who is the second from the left over there, he just celebrated his 15th year as president of Arizona State University. As I think almost all of you know, he has helped the university carve out a reputation for successfully building access, innovation, and excellence. And among many other honors, he has been named one of America's top 10 college presidents by Time magazine. He's also a first-generation college student. Dan Greenstein, to my left here, is Director of Education for Post-Secondary Success at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and he leads efforts there to significantly increase the number of students with post-secondary credentials. He previously worked in the University of California system. He knows a lot about digital libraries, among other things, and he started his career as a history professor at the University of Glasgow. J.B. Milliken, to Dan's left, is Chancellor of the City University of New York. That's a job he started in 2014. He was trained as a lawyer, but he spent most of his career in higher education. Before joining CUNY, he was president of the University of Nebraska, which was also his undergraduate alma mater. And before that, he was senior vice president of the University of North Carolina. Finally, Eloy Ortiz Oakley is Chancellor of the California Community Colleges. He's a U.S. Army veteran. I discovered he was in the 82nd Airborne, and excuse me?
I said, hooah.
That's the noise.
And I think Mike Krause is out here somewhere, and he was in the
He
was in the 101st, so there's a little rivalry going on there.
Right.
So Eloy is a veteran. He's also a community college graduate, and before he started his job last year, he headed the Long Beach Community College District, where he was best known as an architect of the Long Beach Promise, which creates structured paths for students to follow from high school to post-secondary education and training. Now, I'm going to begin by asking each of our panelists a question so they can tell you about some of their priorities and some of the challenges they face. Then we're going to continue the conversation and put some more issues on the table as much as we have time for. There's, goodness knows, a lot to talk about. And then I'm going to try and leave a little bit of time at the end for at least a couple of audience questions. Then we'll finish with some parting thoughts from each of the panelists. So let's start with JB. CUNY has a powerful legacy. It's been called many times the Harvard of the proletariat. That's certainly how it functioned for people like my father, son of immigrants without much education, first-generation college student, went to Brooklyn College, and experienced a significant amount of upward mobility. So it's been an engine of mobility historically. And, you know, as Stephanie quoted something that David Lanhard wrote about how we have to not just be nostalgic for these kinds of institutions, but we have to make sure that we can keep that kind of record of success going. So my question is very broad. You have this huge diverse system. You're the largest urban public university in the country, 4 in 10 students from households making under $20,000 a year, 80% from minority or underrepresented groups. In very broad strokes, what are some of the concrete strategies that you're using to try to maintain that legacy of opportunity? And maybe you can touch on one of the biggest challenges you faced.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, thanks everybody for being here, because this is a remarkable moment, I think, in higher education, and I think we'll get to this at the very end. That'll be my money shot at the end of this talk. But CUNY is a remarkable place, and I think probably most people have some familiarity with it. But just to give you a sense of the scale, 275,000 degree-seeking students in New York City, and about 260,000 adult and continuing education on top of that. You mentioned the profile of our students, the low-income nature of our students, underrepresented nature of our students, but also 40% of them were born in another country. So CUNY is a place that continues to be an institution that welcomes students to this country, to New York, and to a pathway to opportunity. One other point, just so we don't think of CUNY as only an access institution, it's an extraordinarily high-quality institution, a graduate center to the community colleges. And one point I don't get tired of reading about is that we have the largest number of MacArthur geniuses among our alumni of any public university other than Berkeley. So it is a tremendous place in many ways.
You've done well in poetry, too.
What's that?
You've done well in poetry, too.
Exactly, Poetry U. 2 of the last 3 Pulitzer Prizes in poetry are CUNY faculty members. So CUNY has been an access machine for many, many years, among the lowest tuitions in the nation. It's about $6,300 right now for a year for our bachelor's programs of tuition. A robust program in New York State for the tuition assistance program, piggybacking on Pell, and now the Excelsior program for middle class. So it has been a place for many, many years that has been an opportunity for low-income students at low tuition and high aid. But it seems to me like much of higher education, inexplicably for years, we were all about access. We were doubling down on Pell. We were putting in place more scholarship programs. And then somehow along the way it occurred to us that completion meant something too, that there are 1.2 or 3 million individuals in New York that have college credit and no degree and aren't getting the benefit of that bump. So I think one of the most important challenges for CUNY right now, and probably most of higher education, public higher education in this country, is how do we build on that access and increase the success dramatically of our students. So we have a new plan that is really could be based on this conference. There are 3 main themes of this plan. 1 is college ready, 2 is out the door, and 3 is launch a great career. And we have 60% of the high school graduates in New York City that go on to college come to CUNY. We produce between 30 and 40% of the teachers in New York City. So we own this space. You can't get ready for college in your senior year. We believe we own the space from birth to entering the door at college. We own the space certainly from entering college to graduating in a timely way. And we also own the space of graduating and then launching a career. And the plan's called Connected CUNY because we don't believe we can do any of this without deep partnerships, much deeper than in the past, with the K-12 system, with other institutions, philanthropies and others, and state and local government, and then the private sector. So two things that we're trying to do with these challenges. First, getting ready. This requires, we produce most of the universal pre-K teachers in New York City. We need to do much more in early childhood education in New York, and there's an effort launched on this now. We've got 25 to 30,000 students in early college courses across New York. It's free, launches them on the path, gets them ready for college. It has a great deal to do with their level of success. We ought to do more than that. Finally, we need to reform our remediation in New York. We're well on the way to doing that. We have 80% of our community college students show up at the door unprepared for college education. They're a lot of differences of people around this room know in successful remediation efforts and unsuccessful one, and now we're hard at work on that. Finally, the second one, getting people out on time. The urban 3-year community college graduation rate in this country is 16%. That's a scandal. It's completely unacceptable. And CUNY's doing something about it. When I arrived, we had about 4,000 students in the ASAP program. Next year, we'll have 25,000 students. At the end of the 3-year period for that cohort, we will not only lead the nation in urban community college graduation rates by a long shot, we will have doubled our community college graduation rate in 5 years. So that's part of an overall effort to adopt a culture of completion across CUNY, from community college to the bachelor's programs and beyond.
Gotcha. So recognize the problem is not access, it's completion, where access is necessary but not sufficient. Own the problem, look at it along the spectrum, and work at various points from pre-K to completion.
And then launching careers. But
that too would be good. Okay.
Exactly.
Great. All right. Well, thank you. So, Michael, I want to shift to another dimension of this challenge. You have, for several years in a row, I know you're not in many respects a great fan of U.S. News and World Report and their overall college rankings, but you have been named the most innovative college in the country for several years in a row. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about how technology plays into that. You know, you've spent a lot of time and energy building up ASU Online. I think that's a big part of your push toward a very significant enrollment goal. I believe 100,000 is what you're aiming for.
We're above that. We've already gone above that.
You've already gone above that. Okay, so my question, I guess, is do you see this not just as an access strategy, but as a mobility strategy? And to the extent it's the latter, what do you do about this concern that people have that online and some of the technology work is being directed at students who may have some of the biggest challenges really taking advantage of that kind of technology?
Yeah, you know, first, like JB, thank you for the invitation to be here. It's, you know, we feel like we're with a group of people that are viewing the world as something that needs to be changed rather than somehow digging in and holding on to the past, because, you know, it really is the case that the reason that we have the issues that we have, as we heard in the earlier panel, was because that's what we were designed to do. We have a serious design problem. So the issues that we have about completion, the issues that we have about access, the issues that we have about impact, all these things that are going on, they are what they are because that's what we're designed to do. Now, having said that, then, we stepped back 15 years ago and said, the last thing the world needs coming out of a new state, a frontier state like Arizona, is just another public university that follows just the standard path of all the other public universities, which means that excellence ultimately is a function of who you do not admit. That is how you attain excellence and the status of excellence in the United States. You must exclude people. And so some public institutions have this function where exclusion of people will actually work negatively or detrimentally to the success of the region. So we decided to take on the old admission standards from the 1950s, when the great public research universities were admitting B-level students and A-level students, and maintain those admission standards going forward. Now, doing that in the world of today, with the speed of culture change, the diversity that we have, the scale that we have, increasing demand for higher education, means that if your institution can't scale, then it becomes increasingly incapable of adjusting to the needs of the society. So the mechanism for scale for us was the introduction of technology at all levels of the culture. And I mean culture literally, not the organization, the culture. So how do we find these technologies which have been resisted by much of the academy? Apparently the phone is not resisted by the academy. The book is not resisted by the academy. Chalkboards are not resisted by the academy, but other kinds of technology apparently are going to lead to negative kinds of outcomes. And not wanting to be overly sarcastic, which is fun, what we decided to do was the following. Could we take our faculty and turn them into enthusiastic super faculty, empowering them to achieve far more than the historical model ever imagined that they could accomplish? So we infused technology in all aspects of the institution internally for on campus. We infused that same technology then as a way to project that faculty into new learning arenas for people not on campus. And then we took that same technology and said, now, how could we then go K-12? How could we enhance college preparation? How could we use all of that? So the short form of this is that this ability to alter the culture by infusing technology has allowed us to do several of the following things. And so with a faculty the same size as we had in 2002, we're producing 3 times as many graduates, 8,000 and now 24,000, on our way to 32,000 with a faculty of the same size. We're doing 5 times the level of research, from $100 million a year to $550 million a year. Again, the faculty is the same size. A 90% improvement in the 4-year graduation rate across a growing and diversifying student body. Again, the faculty is the same size. And we have, and I'll get, Ben, to the last part of your question, we have multiple pathways in which we're engaging the entire spectrum as we should be. We have a digital high school, which is just released in the last couple of months, coupling into high schools to help them using every asset we have. We have a global freshman academy with several 100,000 students exploring courses and pathways. We have 150 online degree programs with 30,000 degree-seeking students, all admitted to the university, plus the first ABET accredited undergraduate engineering degrees, using robots and every other advanced learning technique that you can imagine. And then along the way, we've learned many lessons. Technology by itself, worthless. Technology embedded into a faculty culture where the faculty now see their role as something to powerfully move in new directions, unbelievably powerful. So to narrow the example just a little bit, in engineering in 2008, we had 8,000 students in engineering, mostly men. Today, in 2017, on campus, we have 17,000 engineering students. We've increased the number of graduates by a factor of 3, the number of minorities by a factor of 5 over that time frame, using every tool imaginable, and have 4,000 online students in addition, giving us 21,000 students in engineering where we had 8,000 students before, with unbelievable diversification across these dimensions, and an improvement in the freshman retention rate from 68% to 90% in engineering. Again, using these tools, making these things happen. So to your question about technology and students and so forth, the hardest lesson that we've learned, particularly in our Starbucks program, our college achievement program with Starbucks, which is 7,000 Starbucks partners, employees that are our students, has been you cannot separate human touch and technology. There must always be some kind of human touch, some kind of engagement, some kind of linkage. These technology tools are powerful if the faculty are well trained. About 2,000 of our faculty are now heavily trained of the 3,400, which is, I think, a good start. And so what we're seeing is tremendously enhanced outcomes by this development of a culture willing to accept technologies as a way to enhance their impact. And this has been powerful for our faculty. We have only one faculty. We only have, our electrical engineering program has 2,000 students on campus, 1,100 students online, and is a top 10 research unit in electrical engineering in the country. And so you take all of that together and make it work. We don't think the students, to the last part of your question, we don't think the students that are online are disadvantaged. They have been disadvantaged by all kinds of organizations that have used these flimsy operations associated with technology to offer schlock products out there. And so there's a lot of that going on. I lived in New York City, I think, too long, JB. And so what we've got is quality faculty enhanced by technology, offering quality opportunities to students across many, many dimensions. Okay,
all right, thank you. Eloy, I want to turn to something that we've already, Secretary Spellings and Secretary King were talking about transfer, and I wanted to talk about your own goal in the California community colleges, where you have set a goal, I think, as part of your sort of initial strategic plan of increasing the number of community college transfers to the UC or Cal State system by 35%. Annually. Annually.
Yes.
So how are you going to do it?
Well, first, let me say, to Margaret's earlier point, there is a place in the country where community colleges are organized, and we have set a goal, and that is the California Community College. But no, seriously though, we have taken a hard look at what California needs from our community colleges. And it's rooted in data, it's rooted in really the kinds of expectations that we should create of our colleges. And in order for our state to continue to be economically viable, we need to increase the transfer rate in order to keep up with the demand that we see on the horizon. So how are we going to do that? We're going to do that by taking our 114 colleges, serving well over 2 million students, and trying to be very focused on what we need to accomplish. We're using a guided pathways framework across the state so that we have a common way of looking at the challenges, of looking at the data, of looking at the expectations. We're setting a clear expectation for our colleges and for our students. Part of this is deeply embedding partnerships between our K-12 system, our community college system, and our university partners. We cannot achieve this in a vacuum. Our strategic vision calls on all of our partners in philanthropy, in K-12, in universities, in the social justice community, to come together around one set of goals. The other is, quite frankly, streamlining our curriculum, streamlining our requirements, and getting students to that completion as quickly as possible. And then finally, you know, we invest $8.6 billion in the California community colleges. And it's about targeting that investment, degree transfer. And then finally, we feel that if we can get those students, and in the document that you referenced, our goal isn't transfer readiness. Our goal is transfer. There's a distinction there. We have too often washed our hands once we say our students are ready and then leave it up to the university partners to accept them. No, we want to put it upon ourselves to carry those students across that threshold. Make sure that we're connecting with our university partners. And in this case, CSU and the UC are our primary university partners, but that won't be our only university partners. To ensure that state policy, that articulation agreements, that everything is there and that we are strongly advocating for those seats in those universities.
Okay. Well, so just a very quick follow-up. What happens if you don't make the goal?
What happens if we don't make the goal? Then we have to continue to find ways to make the goal. It's not a question of whether or not we're going to make the goal. It's a question of how are we going to make the goal. Because I think if we don't make the goal, I mean, there's no point having community colleges or universities anymore. We need to keep pushing ourselves forward. And part of this as well is, you know, we talk about transfer as if that is the be-all, end-all, or credential production. What we're hoping is that convenings like this help us find a better way of measuring the value that we're creating. Credential production is just a proxy for value. You know, what those credentials are, what they mean in the workforce or in the economy, you know, we make a lot of assumptions on what that means. But the key for us is to change the paradigm, to change the attitude, to change the culture of our state and our system, and to get it focused on doing what matters most for students. Transfer is one proxy for that, and it's part of changing the paradigm of what our responsibility is to our students. And I think if we set clear expectations, we will find ways to get to those expectations and then find ways to better measure what that expectation should be.
Okay, thank you. So Dan, this is a question that actually, as it turns out, it wasn't planned, but this is a nice follow-up from something that John King mentioned earlier when he put, or actually was in response to a question, put race on the table. And, you know, the discussion, of course, about upward mobility, you know, focuses a lot on income, on metrics like persistence and graduation rates. When we were talking about what to cover in this panel, you suggested that race and ethnicity just can't be overlooked, that we may have to think about some additional metrics, for example, and ways in which different campus policies may play out differently for different groups. Can you just tell us more about what your concerns are? And in particular, you know, I want to try as much as we can to keep on bringing this back to practice. You know, who's doing the best work in this area that other people can learn from?
Yeah, no, thanks very much for the question. Thanks for the invite. Great to be here. I'm just wanting you to know I'm experiencing a little bit of an imposter syndrome because here I am on a panel with all these folks who are doing the work, foundation guys. We can sort of parachute in and muse about it. Muse I will, but I just wanted to acknowledge the hard work that you guys are doing. So a couple things. So one of them is, if you think about workforce development needs in this country, by 2025, we estimate that the economy will need 11 million more credentialed individuals than colleges and universities are on track to produce. Lumina articulates that goal as 60% of the adult population will have some form of post-secondary credential. Foundations, because they are different, have to find different ways of saying the same thing. 11 million is the same thing, so I just wanted to acknowledge that. And Jeff Stroll from GCW, hold me accountable. There are not enough white, affluent people to meet that number. So race, ethnicity is an issue if you care about keeping the lights on in the economy. We've tapped out on the white upper and middle class. I think there's a second reason. Came up earlier. In a minority state like this, not actually doing better with students who've been historically underserved is political suicide if you take a longer view. And Texas is not the only state in that situation. I think what animates me is it's just wrong. Unless we're trying to prove that the nation can continue to flourish as a democratic republic by disenfranchising whole and increasing portions of its population, then not addressing race, ethnicity in higher education, which is increasingly the only reliable bridge to opportunity left in this country, is just morally wrong. A high-income student is 5 times more likely than a low-income student to achieve a BA by age 24. A white student is 3 times more likely than a Hispanic to achieve the same goal. The adult attainment rate for whites is 37% currently. For blacks, it's 23%. And I guess finally, to a point I think that Margaret made about, the elites are not part of the problem, they're not part of the solution. I think to a certain extent that's true. This is partly a math problem. If you looked at there's only a few hundred institutions, less than a couple hundred institutions that reject more students than they accept, have a 50% or lower acceptance rate. If you add up the numbers and you make some crazy-ass assumptions about those institutions are going to somehow take up 40 to 50% of their enrollments will now be non-white. Of course, by doing that, they're supplanting white. Because elite institutions are, by definition, elite. They're selective. They're not actually growing the number of seats, the capacity, in most cases. So even if you began to sort of make those crazy assumptions, you're still not making a dent in the problem. They are educating too few of the population. So I think to Margaret's point, they're really, it's good work. Everybody should enroll more low-income students, more students of color, including elites. But to the point that was raised earlier, that doesn't actually begin to address the issue. I'm not entirely certain, though, I want to let elites off the hook completely. Because if you look at the funding formula, the federal funding formula, per student, they benefit a great deal more than the institutions which are serving the largest part of this student body. And certainly the vastly larger part of the student body, which is non-white. So race is a big issue. Considering race, ethnicity. So let me just go to a couple of examples of what good could look like. Obviously, using data to get at the problem. We've talked a lot about it today. I just went through a bunch of statistics about graduation rates. But I think we have to go deeper than the sort of gross macro analyses of race and equity in education. Looking, for example, at programs of study that lead to higher paying jobs, to high demand jobs. What's the composition? Even in largely non-white institutions, if you look at the nursing programs, for example, or the engineering programs, they're very different in complexion than the programs that are leading elsewhere. Or look at the disproportion of non-white students in programs of study that actually return negative ROI, cause that you do not earn the wage premium, you incur debt, opportunity cost by going to college, and then you end up in a role that pays less than one that you could have earned coming directly out of high school and going into the labor market. We did some analyses of 2-year colleges in particular, but we've extended it to 4, to look at the folks who don't actually earn the 94% wage premium that is on average, accrued with a college degree. If you get a BA degree, you earn 94% more than somebody with a high school degree. And we're actually looking at the graduates who don't achieve that. And you can guess you can guess the demographic profile of the folks who don't actually achieve that. Is almost as you would expect. So using data to get at the sort of the deeper components of inequity, I think, is really important because it identifies areas where progress needs to be made. Just as the revelation that our graduation rates are poor has helped to mobilize, some significant effort over the last dozen or so years to improve graduation rates, focusing on low-income students, students of color in targeted areas, I think going deeper into the data is going to be super important. And you see folks beginning to do that. Alternative math pathways, right? Algebra 2, calculus isn't required for a lot of jobs. For a lot of jobs that require a college degree, and yet it is a barrier. And there are alternative math pathways that enable students to acquire a college degree without having to go through the Algebra 2 route. Uri said to me in a public setting, though it wasn't directly to me, that it's alternative math pathways are the civil rights issue of our time, and I think that's true. And it's really interesting that it's a very contested issue, even though you're seeing progress. California recently, super exciting. Many other places, really good evidence of success. It's not actually uncontroversial even within the communities that it is intended largely to support. Why are we dumbing down the education to meet the needs of my kids?
So you're talking about math as a pathway to more racial equity.
Alternative math pathways that enable students, all students, to achieve a college degree without going through Algebra 2, the traditional Algebra 2 route. So there's statistical pathways and quantitative pathways that don't necessarily run through Algebra 2, which is a massive barrier for a lot of students, but particularly for low-income students and students of color. So alternative math pathways, and you're beginning to see them emerge in more and more places. Of course, it's not just a 2-year phenomenon, because if the 2 years are going to integrate alternative math pathways successfully, the 4 years need to stand up and actually salute and accept those transfer students who may have come up those routes. Tennessee has done some important work in this area as well. We've talked a lot here about, very gratifying actually, because this work that the foundation has been involved with, all the, I think John, you said at some point it's not that we don't know what to do, it's we don't have the political will to implement what we know. And we've referenced advising, we've referenced guided pathways, we've referenced digital learning, we've referenced a lot of other things that we've had the pleasure of being engaged with. It's not entirely clear to me that all of those interventions work equally well with all students, that there's I like to think of it as a last mile problem, an implementation problem. And the classic example, I guess, is financial aid advising. Anecdotally, because there's not a lot of evidence around this, anecdotally, if one is advising a Latina student about financial aid opportunities, the approach is very different than it would be with an African American male, which is probably different yet again than it would be with a low-income white student from rural America.
How so?
So with the Latina student, you're probably going to have more success with members of the family in the room. With the African-American male, you're probably going to have more success if the advisor is also African-American and or if the advice is delivered by a peer, right? So there's anecdotal evidence suggesting that Estela Ben-Simon has worked in developmental education in the state of Colorado. She's describing the fact that well-known developmental education reforms, use of co-requisite developmental education, the use of classrooms which are significantly restructured along an NCAT model, that those things which the data suggests work incredibly well to move students out of developmental education into their degree-granting courses work differentially well with students in different groups, and that they need to be delivered differently in order to achieve the same effect sizes. So there's more to do, I think, on our stage, instead of just saying, yeah, we know what to do, making sure that we actually know what to do and how to deliver what we know to students in different segments of our population who have different needs and aspirations. So I think that's, and I guess the last one, and this is way out there, and it's not everybody's cup of tea, but I'm going to throw it out because you did ask about people who are doing things that are interesting. There's a small handful of folks who are actually designing an education not around what they think they can deliver, but what they believe and know their students can actually afford. And they're fundamentally rethinking what education delivery looks like in higher education space. So you think about Paul Quinn College, which is a work college in Texas. You think of National Louis University in Chicago. Actually, some of the work that University of Central Florida is doing around its transfers, CUNY, I guess, is an example as well, where they're fundamentally thinking about the population that they're serving. What are the resources that population can bring to bear in terms of supporting its education? And then how do we develop educational pathways that are delivered at a price that can be afforded by that population? And they are willing to make fundamental changes in historic educational delivery structures in order to meet those needs. It's not an easy task because it sort of defies conventional wisdom at every step of the way. But the results are interesting. They're inspiring. They tend to be relatively small in scale, with a couple of exceptions.
Great.
So yeah.
Well, thank you. Gosh, there are so many things that I want to try to get to. I'm just going to dive in and we'll see how far we can get. One is something that I thought first maybe this was too fuzzy to ask about, but I want to ask about culture and expectations. I think that Margaret mentioned the soft bigotry of low expectations, and I was thinking about something that, Eloy, you said in a speech you gave earlier this year. You described being a community college student, taking a chemistry class, and a professor basically telling you, you got to drop this class, you're not going to pass. And that's just an anecdote, but I wonder whether if we're trying to provide more opportunities for students, not only to get in the door, but to succeed, to thrive, to go on to good things, what do you do about expectations and attitudes? Is there any kind of lesson that you try to impart within your institutions that you think would be valuable?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, as has been said, there is not one route toward success, successfully overcoming the challenges that we're talking about. There are multiple routes, and a big one is the paradigm that we have in our institutions, the culture that we have in our institutions. We talk all day long about wanting to be more inclusive, increasing diversity, but at the heart and soul of our institutions is still this cultural issue about who really is capable of succeeding, and we tend to continue to replicate the culture that our faculty, that our administrators came from in the institutions that they graduated from. So we have to find a way to completely shift the paradigm and redesign the way that we're organized in order to change that culture. As long as we continue to tinker at the margins, but maintain the same overall structure, I believe we're not going to be successful. We have to find a way to break through this cultural issue. And so changing the expectation of not only our faculty, our staff, our institutions, and signaling to our students what expectations we have. Because a lot of the challenge we have is, what does higher ed signal all the way downstream? We're signaling, I mean, we talk all day long about K-12, and they're easy to beat up on, but the reality is, it is us that's sending those signals. It is the conversations we're having today about how, well, higher education is up here, and yeah, we're challenged, but we'll fix it. But it's really that K-12 system that's just a mess. Yeah. Those are signals that they hear each and every day. And so the signal that I got in that chemistry class was that, I'm not a full-time student. I'm an older student. I'm a working student. I'm raising a family. You need to go to a faculty member that will lessen the class for you, because I've got a whole class of high-achieving students that you're not going to survive in. I mean, those are the constant signals that we send, and we don't even recognize them. So we can change policy all day long, but until we reorganize ourselves and change the culture and really think about the signals that we're sending, we're not going to change. So yeah. Okay. I think that's a major barrier that we're going to have to deal with.
Okay. Other thoughts?
Yeah. So I ditto on that. I mean, I think that for too long, at places like CUNY and other institutions, there was a delivered wisdom that our students have way too many other obligations. They can only go to school part-time. It's going to take them years and years and years, but it's better that they're accumulating credit than not. But if you push back on that and look at some of the data and what some of the interventions can affect, it's a different picture. And so this is the modern equivalent of tracking students. I mean, we have to say, and that's what we're doing now, with some resistance, that we are adopting across CUNY a culture of completion, that we want every student that comes in, in any way possible, to try to be a full-time student. So we'll take the cost out, we'll take the transportation out, we'll take the other things out of this. But there are institutions across this country that students' success rate is so much higher. And part of that is because they have put in place the support structures that don't allow these students to fail. And not only have it's been too easy for us to say we have a different kind of student that is going to pursue this differently. Well, I don't agree with that. And I think the burden's on us, as Margaret said, first thing, increase advising significantly. I mean, if we look at the successes of our ASAP program and look at cutting the number of students per advisor 5, 6, 7 times, it makes an enormous difference. And so at CUNY, my goal is that we look at it the way elite institutions do, that we're going to build a set of support structures, a safety net. We're not going to allow students to fail. And we're certainly not going to assume that they're on a different kind of path.
Okay. Yeah.
I think what I would add is that I agree with both of these comments, because it really is, at the end of the day, sort of a Peter Druckerism to some extent. And Drucker said, whatever your thing is producing is the best that your present design can produce. If you want to change what you're producing, you must alter the design of your thing, whatever it is. If it's a college, if it's a community college system, if it's a massive urban university, if it's a university like the one that I'm a part of. And so we take that very seriously, down to the finest detail imaginable. It's about the design. And so we started some charter schools because we got into deep arguments with people where we were saying, we need to figure out how to graduate every kid from high school. And they said, well, you people are crazy. Nobody can graduate everybody from high school except for elite college preparatory schools. So we started charter schools. The first year, 7 years into this, we finally had people that had gone along with us to the point where they could graduate. We failed. We had a 98% graduation rate, and we took it as a failure. We took it as a failure. 2 more years of that, and we would have replaced the entire leadership team of the organization. So we have thousands of students in our charter schools. We have thousands of students in our online high school. And what are we doing from all of this? That's in the first semester of the online high school. What are we doing from this? We're trying to set expectations. I agree with Dan's comments relative to college algebra and getting the right math and getting it right. We're also unwilling to retreat from the notion that anyone can learn anything. There's not like different kinds of humans. There's humans. Yes, there is variation in interest, variation in some abilities and so forth, but not about stuff that's basic. And so we launched, again, back to design. We needed a way in which math was not going to be this bugaboo. We spent millions of dollars, worked with other companies, worked with groups, made things happen. We've got this online adaptive math course called College Algebra. We have another class, online adaptive math course called Pre-Calculus. You could call them something else, and it might take some of the negative energy away from it. Call one, how to solve for an unknown. Call the other, how to think in 3 dimensions with tools. They're called silly names. We've got 50,000 kids exploring in these classes right now from all over everywhere, and we're seeing tremendous, tremendous changes in outcome and performance. So the key is, are you willing to change your design? If you're not, then your outcome will be exactly the same. Just for the reference for the audience, I was 12 years before I went to ASU, faculty member in one of the provosts at Columbia University, and I was also many years a trustee of a small elite, quote unquote. We use the word elite. I use the word elite in quotes every single time I use it in any written document. Elite means a selected student body. An elite performing institution could also be the City University of New York graduating 95% of its students from every family background that you could possibly imagine. Now that's an elite institution performing an elite function, not setting aside students that they are unwilling to educate. And so the point of all this is that at the root it's design, the design of the institution.
Okay. I want to talk about the faculty. And I think of the various pathways, programs, there are lots of permutations and combinations, but trying to create more efficient pathways to degrees, rethinking gen ed requirements, and that is sometimes a tough sell with the faculty. And I think it's one of those practical barriers that we can all talk about these great new ideas, but when you're in the trenches and you're actually trying to change something, it can be challenging. And I wanted to ask JB about this because at CUNY, this has definitely been on the table. You've gotten a lot of pushback both before you arrived and since you've been there. And then at Eloy, I think that you've had somewhat less pushback. And I'd like to know, and Michael, I'm not sure, you've of course had all kinds of faculty discussions over the years, but I wonder if you could just talk about what are the challenges when you're trying to speed something through the system that may challenge people's funding, that may challenge their sort of understanding of the importance of their department or their topics, and how do you navigate that successfully?
So there are benefits to the way that the CUNY is structured, tremendous benefits that allow us in one place to give high school diplomas and PhDs. And so I'm constantly grateful for that structure. 100,000 of my students in community colleges and 175,000 in bachelor's and beyond. But this may be one where I'm a little envious of Eloy because I have the folks on both sides of this question of the transfer. And if anybody should get it right, we should be getting it right because they're all in one room. And we had a enormously ambitious Pathways, capital P program to create basically a gen ed program that was acceptable across CUNY to ease transfer among our institutions, certainly including from the community colleges to the senior colleges. But I think an example of how difficult it is to bring significant structural change to higher education today, even at a place like CUNY with our mission and with the commitment of our faculty. And I have yet to meet one faculty member who didn't almost emotionally embrace the commitment and the mission of CUNY. So there's nothing to do with I think the motivations of the people who oppose this program, but oppose it they did. Lawsuits, vote of no confidence in the Board of Trustees, and now we're several years into it. We don't have enough data to demonstrate its effectiveness, but I think it is intuitive to most people in this room that it will ease the path of transfer and that it is a student-centric, a student-focused initiative, and it has to succeed one way or another. But faculty, not just at CUNY, everywhere, guard their prerogatives, and often for some good reasons, jealously.
Well, so Michael, any tips for handling faculty?
Well, so one of the things that I tried to do when I showed up 15 years ago was I said, we're going to have a lot of arguments, and we're going to have a lot of debates, and we're going to work our way through a lot of things as we work towards these goals, but we're no longer arguing about the following things. I don't care about your parking fees. I don't care about anything except the success of our students. Don't talk to me about any of that stuff. And secondly, we're not having any more arguments about, well, you can't do this, and you can't do that, and you can't do this. The only thing we're arguing about is how do we attain our goal. If you don't like the idea that we have or that I have or that some other team has put on the table, then you must deliver a better idea. And then the other ideas will go away and then we'll move towards that goal. And 85, 90% of the time now we've been able to get that to work because it's about the goal. Now we don't take away, we eliminated 80 academic units. We built 20 transdisciplinary schools. We've built scores and scores of new degrees, eliminated entire colleges. Made all those things happen. There's an academic senate. They have engaged on all of those things in a way that they've been constructive. And so it's about, again, that's why I keep emphasizing design. We've said we're changing the design of the institution to achieve these objectives. Just like you said, JB, the faculty say, yeah, we agree with those objectives. Okay. If you agree with those objectives, then all we're arguing about is how do you hit those objectives? And that has made this discussion somewhat better. I'll also say that when people see outcomes, they see changes in outcomes that they're partly responsible for, they feel really good. So we have worked to destroy, and I'm going to use that word again, to destroy the bureaucratic mindset of academia by empowering faculty members to be designers of their own fate. And that has been a hugely empowering thing for us.
Great. So Eloy, have you destroyed, well, please, Dan, you first, then Eloy.
I just wanted to put in a shameless plug for two books by two CUNY faculty, Kathy Davidson and Gail Mello. Both have written recently about pedagogy and, obviously the work of faculty, making the point, which I've heard Eduardo Padron at Miami-Dade make, and correctly, that we're going to get only so much of a bump from all the things we're talking about here, pathways and DevEd reform and advising, et cetera. And we know probably we can model what that bump is. The next big bump, and it's going to be bigger than the ones we're going to get from all these administrative interventions, is going to come from the pedagogical changes, or the changes in pedagogy which are made in the classroom, which may be virtual or may be physical. And those points are powerfully made in both of those books, which I urge us to read. So I think as we think about the faculty, we need to think about the faculty as basically the troops that are going to get us through and to the situation that we're in and to the goals that we articulate.
Yeah.
I mean, from my perspective, keep it simple, stupid. I mean, we've got to keep it simple. We've got to appeal to the core value of every member of the faculty in our colleges, which all of them have
Parking?
the same core value. Appeal to it, look at the incentives that we have built into the system. We're all humans. We function based on incentives. We have to realign the incentives. And we have to appeal to them in terms of the importance of their work. I think for far too long, we've not only set low expectations for our community colleges, but we've also, relegated them to the lowest rung of higher education. And we're trying to reverse that. Remind them that nearly 1 in 4 of every community college student in the nation is a California community college student. They not only impact their 114 communities, they're impacting the nation. And so pounding that message into them, helping them understand that this is their moment to really make a huge impact. Something that they've always wanted to do, why they work at community college. And by redesigning ourselves, we will give them the opportunity to realize that impact.
Gotcha. Well, lots more to do. We're almost out of time. What I'd like to do is take a couple of questions from the audience, and I'll ask you just to ask the questions, and then we'll have the panel take them, and then I'll offer a few last thoughts, and then we'll wrap up in 5 minutes or so. So do we have a couple of questions? There's a gentleman back there.
My name is Jeff Stroll again. My question is about the perverse incentives of a completion agenda. The gentleman brought up one of them, which is you filter at the beginning. There's also another perverse incentive, which is tracking. I think we need to face it when we're talking about social mobility. African Americans stop out with certificates at a much higher rate than any other group, and the earnings differences across the life cycle between an AA and a BA are about $700,000 on the life cycle. Between an AA and a professional degree, they're several $1 million. And so how do we, to the panel, how do we deal with these, one group stopping out, I mean, just going only for completion, right? So how do we get more people going higher?
In Texas, the high-value ones for community colleges are nursing, business accounting, and IT. 62% of the students who get those degrees started community college with a bachelor's degree. Almost none of them are low-income students. The NRC data released last year shows that we are doing a terrible job of equitably graduating engineers, anyone in math-based fields. So how do you, as institutional leaders, assure that low-income students have equal access to high-value programs, impacted ones in particular?
So I'll give part of the same answer I've been giving, and I'll use our engineering school as an example to both of the questioners. And so, we have 5 times as many minority students in engineering as we did just a few years ago. 5 times. And it's a function of the fact that we decided to do it. You have to face the fact that previously we decided not to do it. And we didn't decide not to do it because the institution is, historically limited in its vision of equality. It's historically limited, as are most institutions, in their willingness to change their design. We made a decision to change the design, and all outcomes became functionally altered as a part of that. I hear over and over and over, well, how did you get your faculty to do this? Or how do you get faculty to do this? Or how do you change this? Or how do you do that? Well, you do it or you quit. You do it or you should be replaced by someone that can. And so what I mean by that is it is, in fact, the structural and cultural organisms that we have. This goes back to Dan's point. The faculty in these new designs will perform markedly differently. They will innovate in different ways. They will scale in different ways. They will deal with diversity in different ways. They will graduate more students across broader spectra of incoming backgrounds. And so it's a function of how you construct your entity.
One of the things I think we have to do, and this gets me to sort of the third theme of the CUNY plan, is the part about launching careers, is we need to bring in high-value employers and sectors earlier on, have much more experiential learning opportunity for our students, the kind who are much less likely to have family and friends working in the finance industry in New York or the tech sector in New York. So we need to build that in as a part of their education.
Yep.
One of the programs we have now is Whitney, Women in Technology and Entrepreneurship, done with Cornell Tech, with Verizon, IBM, Accenture, and others. The whole idea being around how do we get women and minorities, and women in particular, less than 20% represented in the tech sector, and the number's gone down in the last few years. So we start in high school. We start in high school with camps at Cornell Tech, then the scholarships to CUNY, and then internships with the private sector partner and jobs. And I think we've got to do that on a much different scale across the institution so that our students have the same opportunities that their peers elsewhere have to get in these high-value occupations.
Okay, Eloy.
We've got to deal with the elephant in the room, systemic racism. However you want to chop it up, whether intentional or unintentional, we have created pathways to these high-valued credentials and degrees that exclude low-income students and students of color. We've talked about the alternative math pathways. Every one of those high-value degrees goes through the killing fields of our institution, algebra. So we have designed a system that is intentionally excluding the people that we're talking about. So unless and until we're ready to change that, we're just patting ourselves on the back and saying, yes, we understand the high-value degrees, but we're not willing to really do what we need to do to change the numbers.
So can I take this? I'm going to take it from two different angles. So one of them is, I think, part of me agrees that the completion agenda can obscure the sort of the subtler inequities that exist in higher education. And that was, I think, the point that I was trying to make earlier, that the pathways into the high-value programs of studies are pathways which are largely, not exclusively, open to students from white and relatively affluent backgrounds. And that's a problem. And then the historian in me says, well, wait a minute, I think this is true. Social mobility in this country is rarely a one-generational phenomenon. Not exclusive, not never, but rarely. And so the question then that I ask, and it was planted in my head the other day, the visit in Florida, Dale, thank you very much, Whitaker. If it's true that social mobility is a two-generational activity and has been historically, then ensuring that students graduate at some level with some certification which allows them to get a stable place for themselves and their family on the economic ladder so that their children then can have the opportunities that they themselves did not have, does not seem to me necessarily to be a bad outcome.
The problem I have with that, Dan, is that we keep moving the goalposts now.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Every time we say that, then the next iteration for the next generation, for those same students, we have completely moved the goalposts. So So I think you're right, but we have to look at the problem with a different urgency now, because those income gaps continue to grow, even though we see subsequent generations now starting to achieve some sort of higher education success.
No, that's a great point.
Well, things are heating up, but I will just ask if you have, maybe those are your parting thoughts, or if you have one sentence to leave us with, lightning round.
And maybe two. So last night I heard President Fenby say, quote an earlier president of the University of Texas, that the true endowment for a public university is public confidence. And it's the reason I think this is so important. Not only are we, I think, doing some tremendous work to increase opportunity for individuals, but if we can establish again that higher education is the pathway from low-income students, from underrepresented students to the middle class and beyond, and do it effectively on a mass scale, then we will have the public confidence again in higher education in this country.
I think the only thing I would add, just as a final comment, is that all of the things that we haven't been able to attain have been our own fault. There's no one else responsible in this sector. It's not some group of politicians who are funding us less or funding us more. It's for the things that we've been talking about. We have created exactly what we've got. And the only way out of it is to set very aspirational goals and change everything going forward, if you want a different outcome.
So it's the pogo principle.
Yes.
I would just say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And we are all well-intentioned people in this room, and we have to find a different road. We have to create a different road together. Because, you know, even for all this effort, we still are looking at data that suggests that the students in our institutions, the majority of them, are just not going to make it.
Okay. I guess one final thought. Something's been bugging me, I guess, since November. A few things have been bugging me since November. And that is that a lot of the thinking and discussion in higher education reform is really very technocratic in its nature, and it's been borne out, really, in the conversations this morning, and will, I'm sure, today, and that's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. And you'd expect a guy from the Gates Foundation to say that. The technocratic solutions are really important. The challenge that I see in the survey data that was mentioned earlier is that this actually is probably no longer a technocratic campaign. It's a campaign for the hearts and minds of the American public, which is a very different kind of movement building than the kind of technocratic stuff that we're used to. And it's a narrative changing activity. And that's not something that we've been engaged with, I think, as a community, and is likely something we'll need to be engaged in as a community to be responsive to the beautiful plaque that was on the wall last night in reference just now.
Yeah, that's a very, very powerful ending point, Dan. And I should just tell you that we're now going to have a break for 10 or 15 minutes. We'll just wait for the chimes to call us back in. And please join me in thanking this fantastic panel.